everyone, welcome back to our channel. I am Emily Brady, co-owner and designer at Rustic Fashion Studios. Today I'm going to show you a really fun tumbler. This one is on sunflowers and pumpkins with cotton that I did for fall. It's one of my most popular tumbler designs. I do a little hand drawing outline around all of the design. This can work on any design. I've done it in the past on tropical foliage and succulents, orchids, and then this pumpkins. And I'm starting one now for Christmas. So it's super fun. I've had a lot of requests for this tumbler. So I really hope you guys like it. It's really pretty easy, and it's just water slides and hand drawing with an acrylic pen, so you don't need to print out any vinyl or do anything extra. So it's really easy to do. But if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments down below, and I will also link some discount codes for some of the products I use, as well as links to all the products and where you can get everything that I use. So, hope you guys enjoy. To get started, I'm using a 30-ounce skinny tumbler from MAKERFLO Crafts. These ones come pre-sanded, so those are my favorite ones to use. I just pull it out of the box and give it a good wash to make sure there's nothing left on it. And then once that's dry, I primed it with this heirloom white spray paint. Went ahead and just did 2 coats of that on my tumblers, and then going to make sure that they are all level on my turner and get started with the epoxy. For these, I tried 2 different colors of glitter. The first one was Chantilly from Peachy Olive Glitters, and the second is Antique from Charm City Sparkles and Crafts. Both have kind of a similar creamy white color to them, and I kind of just wanted to see what the difference would look like under epoxy. So to apply the glitter to these, I'm actually going to mix it into my epoxy and use it as the first coat. It kind of speeds up that time, and then it's nice and smooth, and you don't need to wait for, you don't need to apply glitter to the cup and then put a coat of epoxy over it. This just kind of blends it all in, and you really don't need a whole lot. Looks like more here than what it actually was. I just made sure that it wasn't going to look too thin once I applied it to my tumblers, and just give it a nice good coverage. I also used a little bit of this pearl colored mica powder you can see underneath there. It's a little bit of a golden color, and I would just add a tiny bit of that into my epoxy. I really wanted that creamy antique off-white color on my tumblers. So between the glitter and the mica powder, it really added to what I wanted it to look like. And the 2 different glitters in the end, I think the Chantilly from Peachy Olive looked a little bit more, had more color flash to it, more blingy, and then Antique from Charm City Sparkles and Crafts was a little bit more classy, had more silver throw to it than the rainbow holographic colors. Both turned out super pretty, not a huge difference, just kind of depends on the look that you want to go for. For my epoxy, I used the KS LIQUIDY Split, and I actually only just did 1 coat of glitter. So once that is dry, as long as it's smooth, you're ready to move on to the water slides. So here I am just opening up my silhouette, and I'm going to show you kind of how I created the images that I'm going to use for the water slides on here, the sunflowers and pumpkins. I buy the images that I like on Etsy, and I'll have that listed in the description box below. And some of these come in like little groupings, some are individual. And then what I did was just, I already have one made here that I pulled up, but I'm going to show you how to create one if you need to. I just pulled the images that I wanted to use from the files onto my, onto my silhouette. And then you're just going to arrange them how you want them to look for your water slides. And I apply my water slides in 2 parts. It's not a full sheet. I do the top and then I do the bottom. So, and I don't duplicate the top and bottom. I make 2 separate arrangements just so that it gives them some variety. It's a little bit different. I don't want it to just look like a manufactured replica. Once I have my arrangement all together how I like it, I go ahead and group it together, and then I take my knife tool that you just saw there, and I slice a straight line off of the bottom, and that'll be the edge of the water slide. I go ahead and delete that bottom part, and then I regroup all the images again into one, and then my water slide paper is size A4, so I have my canvas size set up to that. And for a 30-ounce tumbler, pretty much need the image to go completely from top to bottom and fill the whole page. So I'm going to just basically size it until it's large enough to fill that whole page, and then go ahead and print it. And in my printer settings, I'm going to set it so that it is a borderless print. I don't want it to have any margins on there that are going to crop anything off. And then in the settings of the borderless print options, I'm going to set it to retain size so that it does not shrink it down or adjust it at all. And then I'll set my paper type to a high glossy one, and then the high print quality, and go ahead and print that out. Once it's printed, I seal it 2 times with the triple thick spray, and after that I'm ready to cut them out to apply them to my tumblers. I just kind of loosely cut around each part of the image. I don't worry about getting too close, so that I don't want it to have too much extra left on there. And then along the straight edge, I will cut it right up next to the image and not have anything hanging over. And then once I have both of those cut, I'm going to size to see how they fit around my tumbler. This one fits pretty good just like it is. And then I don't do the warp on my silhouette if you have a tapered tumbler. With these large image files, it seems to get really bogged down when you try to do that. So I either use a straight tumbler, or as you see here, I just kind of mark around my cup where the taper is, and it just gives that slight little curve, and then I'll go ahead and take my scissors and cut that off. I'm kind of making my own warp to the image. Also, if there's too many leaves or images overlapping, I'm going to go ahead and cut those out as well. And then I will use those to fill in if there's a gap on the top, since the top on this cup, since it's a tapered cup, the top is a little bit larger. And you'll see here in a little bit how I use those extra leaves to fill in that extra spot. Once everything is cut out, I do 1/2 at a time and just place that half in the water and let it soak for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then I make sure my cup is wet as well. Once it's ready to apply, these larger sheets I really like to apply in the reverse method, kind of like you would a temporary tattoo. So here I'm just testing my water slide to see if it's ready to come off or not. When it's ready, it's really going to slide quite easy. And then while I go ahead and apply the first bottom half of the tumbler, I get the top piece soaking so that it will be ready to go once I finish up with this one. I make sure there's enough water on there just so I can slide it around easily if I need to and adjust it. And then I make sure the bottom is all lined up so one side isn't lower or higher than the other. And then I just slide that paper backing right off. These silicone brushes are my favorite tools, and you'll use that just to squeeze out all the water. Here you can see I got one little piece that kind of folded under on my leaf, so very carefully try to unfold any creases or anything like that before moving on. Don't mind my mom bun here. But make sure you really go around the whole cup a couple of times. You don't want any water left underneath of there, otherwise you'll get these little bubbles that get really ugly under epoxy. And focus on the bottom rim as well, since it kind of curves right there. Sometimes you can get some extra creases. And then when it's time, go ahead and move on to the top of the tumbler. Again, make sure that your cup is wet and ready so that the water slide will move around easily for you. On these water slides, one side usually overlaps over the other, so I kind of press one down and then move that paper out of the way so that you can lay the other one directly on top of it. And right here at this seam of the two is where there's a little bit of a gap, so I use that extra little piece of leaves just to fill in right up there. and then right there it is. And then make sure again to squeeze out all the water from your water slides. And then I usually let mine set overnight. I know some people do it in just a couple of hours. So whatever works for you, or if you have a warm room or a heat gun to kind of speed up the process a little bit. So now after my water slides have completely dried, I give them a coat of matte clear spray paint, and I just do that so that the epoxy will not repel, since I used a glossy spray paint the first time and my tumbler in the center is not sanded. In this next layer, I'm going to use a little bit of Venetian from Peachy Olive Glitters, and this is a chunky mix, and it's very similar to Chantilly, if not the same cut. And I just mix a very small amount into my epoxy, and I'm going to apply this on the next layer. You'll notice in some of my cups, it just kind of gives it a lot of dimension and a little bit more pizzazz to the tumblers. And then I use the KS Liquidity Split again. That way I could move on to the next step of the outlining process in just a few hours once it's dried. A couple tips I've picked up with using the KS Lickety Split is to make sure your room is very warm. I usually keep mine between 80 and 90 degrees with a little space heater that's not pointed directly on my tumblers. And then I mix up a minimum of 60 milliliters total, and that just helps. I know some people have had problems with it being sticky and things like that, and that has really helped me, and I've never had a problem when I use that method. And then also just make sure you stir it long enough, even after it turns clear. I just continue to stir for another minute or two. Once that's completely dried, I go on to outlining the images. And I just use a fine paint pen here from Walmart that I've picked up. And I do not make these perfect at all. I don't try to stay on the lines or anything like that. I like them to be abstract. So I just kind of go around each image, and here these markers, you have to press them to get started. So sometimes if it seems like the flow isn't coming out enough and your lines are a nice rich solid color, then I kind of press down on the tip to get a little bit more of that paint to come out. I like to add a lot of texture to these, so I'll do different types of line styles. Inside of the sunflowers, I do a little stippling, a lot of little dots. The leaves, accent some of the veins or some little squiggly lines. And then off of some of the little branches and leaves that hang down, you see that I do a little trail coming off of them down into that center of the tumbler, and some dots and stuff here and there. And the different line qualities and types that you do really just kind of give it some fun texture and pizzazz to your cup. And this is a metallic marker, so it really stands out. And don't be afraid to double outline or do single lines, kind of whatever is your style and whatever works best for you. When you don't worry about making it too perfect, it really comes out the best, I think, when you can kind of just have that nice organic shape to it. After I'm finished outlining, it dries pretty quickly, but I let it sit for 10 minutes or so, and then I give it another coat of clear matte spray paint, or I'll use the CC DIY quick coat just to kind of seal in the lines and move on to the next layer of epoxy. So in this next layer, this is our third layer. This can just be a really thin layer to seal in your lines. After this, we're going to go ahead and sand the rim to kind of clean up the water slide, the top, and those lines, and then you'll just need one more layer of epoxy to be finished up. So when I move on to sanding my tumblers, I like these 60 grit sanding blocks. They're really easy to hold and make sanding the top rim pretty easy, but use whatever works best for you, whether you use a Dremel or just sandpaper. My other sandpaper I showed is a 220 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I use that for the rest of the body of the tumbler. And as you've noticed, this is actually the first time I've sanded my tumbler, just because you don't want to sand under the water slide, so you can't sand after that first layer. And then you also don't want to sand before outlining your tumbler, because even with a really fine grit sandpaper, you still have little lines in there from sanding, and then your marker or your paint pen will actually bleed into those lines and not leave it nice and clean. So I do not sand between the other layers. The only time I sand is after everything has been sealed in. I make sure the bottom is level and flat, the bottom rim is completely smooth, and then that top rim. And then I do take that wet dry sandpaper and just go over the entire tumbler one more time before we put that final coat on there. Now, if you find any other times while creating this, if your cup is not completely smooth, like maybe after you apply that glitter epoxy layer, go ahead and sand it so that it is, and then apply one more layer of epoxy before you move on to those water slides. So sand if you need to, but if you get lucky, you should not have to until after this third layer. After you have finished sanding and drying your tumbler, you can move on to that final layer of epoxy. This is just going to seal everything in and finish it up. On a 30-ounce tumbler, I typically use probably about 20 milliliters of epoxy. Everything's already been sealed in once, so really you just need to get a smooth coat that's nice and shiny on here. I do not use a quick coat for the final layer, even though the KS Liquidy Split can be. I have used it, but I find that I like the Art UV the best from KS as well, just to do a nice UV protection final layer on that. So whatever your preferred epoxy is, go ahead and add that, and then you are all completed. So thank you everyone for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I've done this design on many different styles before, so get creative, and I can't wait to see what you find and come up with.